right. Are we live? Let's see if we're live right now. Okay. All right. How's it going, everyone? Thanks so much for joining. This is my first time doing a live stream, so it should be interesting. Hopefully the quality is good. Let me know. Audio's looking good. Video, everything. I'm streaming this from my DSLR, which I've never done before. I've only ever done webcams and whatnot. But yeah, just let me know if everything sounds good, and we'll continue. Cool. So yeah, thanks so much everyone for joining. Hope you're having a good Friday today. I've just been doing a little bit of image processing here at my house, and I figured, well, probably as good a time as any to try to do this live stream processing session. So we're going to do a little bit of seascape processing today, a little bit in Lightroom. I think we might do a little bit in Photoshop too. And then I figured we could maybe save the last part of this live stream for a Q&A, and then I can answer any questions. I've got all the live chats here on my phone because I actually have a one screen set up here, so I can answer all the questions, but I'll be looking down at my phone to do so. Yeah, thanks again for joining. So here is the session that we're going to process, and actually this is one of my favorite days out at one of my favorite places, which is the potholes out in La Jolla, down in San Diego at the La Jolla Coves. And this was one of the first places I got started taking landscape photography. So it's a place that's very special to me. You know, I spent a lot of time here just really learning how to shoot photography in general. And this was from a fairly recent trip. I went down there last year to visit my parents, and just got treated with this really incredible sunset. So, you know, as the sunset was kind of shaping up, the light was really beautiful on these ridges, and so I'm taking different exposures here. And then clouds started popping even more, and I started focusing on some closer patterns here. Here's a person kind of photobombing. And then the sunset really started to pop, and we got these just incredible colors to work with. So I figured we could process some of these and do some global edits in Lightroom, just going through the sliders, and then we'll go through and do more selective edits and maybe bring the images into Photoshop to do a little dodging and burning. I think the first thing to do is just decide which image to process, though, because there's so many cool images to work with here. Like this one's interesting because it's more subtle than the other sunsets. I mean, like if you look at this sunset image, is just like crazy blazing colors, but you know, there's something about this one I actually like, the subtlety here. I do like how most of the image is soft and blue, and then you've got this really nice warm tone towards the horizon and this awesome uneven horizon that I forgot to level. Yeah, let's see what else we could process. I also have another image in here that I thought could be fun, and it's this one. And if I bring up the exposure a little bit, you can see why I like this image. These ridges right here were just so fun to work with. I love this lead-in that you get into the clouds in the background, and how the foreground kind of pulls you in, almost like into this brighter middle area, and the clouds kind of mimic that same pattern, which I think is pretty cool too. So this will be another one to play around with. Just checking the live chat. Oh, sorry. So this is all shot with the Nikon D850, and pretty much every image in here is with the 16-35. And to be honest with you, I think all of these images were shot at about 16 millimeters. So Not much to say there. This wasn't one of those days where I was, pulling out the telephoto a lot. I mean, I was really just focused on these wide-angle patterns for this evening. So let's start out and process. I think this one looks really nice right here. I love the formation here. It's very symmetrical. And you have that same sort of lead-in, the pull-in with these I guess you could call them potholes in the foreground, and the same kind of mimicking shape of the clouds. I got really lucky here with the clouds, to be honest, to make this really nice kind of V shape. What you'll notice with this image, if I pull up the exposure, is I'm focused on the background here, but I'm very, very close to the foreground. So if we go to the foreground here, it's a little bit out of focus, which is fine. To be honest, I could probably process this image and not focus stack it, but I did take a focus stacked image for this as well. If I pull up this exposure of this image, you can see I'm focused here on the foreground, and then we go out of focus right about here towards the midground. So what I can do here is I can process both of these files pretty much exactly the same, and then just do a very simple blend of the two in Photoshop. And it's very simple, and if you've never really even opened Photoshop a lot, it'll still be pretty easy to do this process. So I'm going to start out with this one, since this one has the background in focus. The background is mostly in focus in this photograph. And you'll notice, you might be asking, well, are you going to exposure blend these images? I don't think I'm going to, because I've found that, especially with the newer cameras that have come out, like the D850, pretty much any of the new Sonys, probably the new Canons as well, there's so much dynamic range in these cameras that if you underexpose the image a little bit, just enough to where you're retaining these brighter highlight details, you have more than enough room to work with the shadows and the highlights and not really have to do a lot of exposure blending. Now, if the sun was just blazing in the sky, like you've got the sun beaming through the scene, then maybe you'd consider doing some exposure blending. But for most of the images that I've shot recently, and any of the new vlogs that you've been seeing, I haven't really had to do any exposure blending at all. Like, I've barely pulled out any sort of blending techniques for, I think, the last 2 or 3 seascape vlogs that I've done. And I've shot those seascape vlogs at sunset as well. So, if you're just underexposing the scene a little bit, you can probably get away with not exposure blending. Now, that being said, I still do shoot different exposures. As you can see here, I'm shooting different exposures just in case. I want to make sure that when I get back into Lightroom, I have the tools in case I have to do exposure blending, but it's not often that I have to do that much anymore. All right. The first thing I like to do with Lightroom is just do my basic edits. Oops, the webcam just went off. Sorry, you guys. New setup. Okay, we're back. Sorry about that. It may turn off every once in a while. I'm using the D850 to live stream, and it's probably not the best camera to be doing this with. Best LaCroix flavor, lime. Lime LaCroix is the best. I don't know. They're probably all pretty good. Okay, we're just going to start processing this image. First thing I'm going to do here is play around a little bit with the highlights, the shadows. So I'm going to take the highlights down a little bit. And not too much, because if you go too far, you start, you pull the highlights too far down, you pull the shadows too far up, you end up starting to get a little bit of that sort of HDR look, which is fine if you're going for that aesthetic, but for most of my photography, I like to keep it a little bit more subtle. But I am going to bring the shadows up a little bit. And I'm also going to bring the blacks up. And you can see what that's doing to the histogram. So the shadows are right here. They're not the darkest tones in the photograph. The blacks are going to be kind of your darkest, blackest tones in the photograph, and then the shadows are going to be a little bit above that. So I like to play with both. As far as the white slider, we can take that down a little bit as well. In a sense, we're kind of like removing the contrast a bit, but then we're going to bring more contrast in selectively later on. And, you know, we may bring it in globally too, just using the contrast slider here. So just looking at this photograph, it's perhaps a little bit underexposed, but I like the exposure in the sky. So I think what we're going to do is bring up the foreground more. Let's just go through here and make sure that we have our profile corrections applied. So I'm down here in lens corrections, and this is something I do to every single photo. There's not a single photo that I take that doesn't go through this process. It's really important to remove chromatic aberration. This is going to be little edges. You sometimes get fringing on the edges of tonal contrast, so those areas in between the highlights and the shadows. You can see sometimes it's a magenta cast or a little bit of cyan. It doesn't look like we have a lot of it in this photograph, but some may show up as we start to process the image more. You can actually see right here, there would be some chromatic aberration, that little strip of magenta right there. And depending on what lens camera you're using, you might see this more or less. But all I do is tap that button, that little checkbox, make sure there's no chromatic aberration, we're good to go. And then I like to apply profile corrections. If you're using a native lens to your camera, so, you know, like a 16-35 Nikon on a Nikon D850, it's going to automatically recognize the lens. If you're using a lens that's manual, you're going to need to input this manually. Let's see here. Which screen brightness do you use to edit your images? So I am using a BenQ monitor right now on a custom PC, and I'm doing that on, it's color corrected as well, not just factory settings, but also using a Spider X color correct. Is it Spider X? I hope I'm saying that right. I think it's like a spider color corrector device. I'm probably not saying that right, but yeah, just type in Spider X. I think that you'll pop up with the right one. My monitor brightness, it's probably like 75%, I would say. But the nice thing about the color correction device is it tells you what to set your monitor at while you're correcting the monitor. So works pretty well. Okay, back to this profile correction. You can see what it does here. It's going to remove a little bit of the vignetting that's going to be caused by your lens. Luckily, this lens doesn't have a great deal of vignetting, so it's not too much of an issue. And it, of course, corrects some of that bowing of the wide-angle lens, which oftentimes is not very appealing. One thing I am noticing, of course, like in most of my images or a lot of them, is I tend to rush some of my compositions and I get crooked horizons. So here's a case where, especially when I apply this, I'm noticing, okay, my horizon's pretty crooked. Now I got to go towards the top of the photograph and go to the crop tool, just make sure we're straight on the horizon. You can do it by just twisting this right here, and that works pretty well, or you can use the angle tool right here and go from one side of the photograph towards the other. And what's interesting about this image that is a little different than a lot of other images that I shoot is the horizon. It's very noticeable on this left side. Like, you can very clearly see the edge of the horizon. Here on this side, it's almost like the horizon blends in with the sky. And I remember I had an image similar to this in another situation where I kept correcting the horizon, but there was a wave that was coming through right under the horizon that was angled, and it kept making the image look lopsided. And even sometimes I look at like an image like this and I'm like, oh, even though the horizon's correct, is it lopsided because the wave is a little crooked? Anyways, doesn't really matter, but okay. Correct horizon, looking good. Global edits looking good. I may add a little bit of vibrancy here towards to the photograph just to give the sky a little bit more punch. You know, when I'm processing images like this, especially when the sunset is, I mean, the sunset in person, when I was standing there, I can't tell you how incredible the sunset was. I mean, it was hard. It was hard to look at with the naked eye. It was so bright and vivid. And when I look at this, the raw file doesn't do a great job expressing that feeling that I had. It's just a lot more dull. So I am going to add quite a bit of vibrancy to this photograph to really make those colors pop. I'm not going to really add saturation because saturation's not as smart of a tool as vibrancy is. Vibrancy is basically going to take your image and it sort of analyzes the colors that are in the image, and it understands which colors are already pretty saturated, and it tries to saturate the other colors that are a little less saturated in the photograph. Whereas saturation, if we pull this all the way, it's just going to saturate all the colors evenly. And you'll notice that as I bring that saturation all the way up, the reds and the reds, yellows, and oranges are just completely out of gamut. Whereas vibrancy, you can see a lot more push in the blues and the magentas because the program understands that those oranges and yellows are they're pretty crazy. So, you know, I'm going to push a little bit of vibrancy here. Okay, I'm going to push a lot of vibrancy here. And we can always go back on these colors. Like if the blues or something are a little oversaturated, we can adjust that using some selective adjustments. And I'm just going to give a touch of saturation, maybe 10%. All right, let's see. Could you talk a little bit about how you store your photos, how many drives? Okay, I'm going to talk about that while I process a little bit of this image. Oh, for some reason I looked down and then I looked up and I'm like, I went too far with the vibrancy. This is an important tip before I talk about how I store my images. I'm also losing my voice. One tip for processing. This is the biggest tip I can give anyone who's starting to process landscape photography or or really any type of photography. Do your edits, spend like an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, however long it takes you to process the image, and walk away. Don't release the photograph right after you're done. Just walk away, go do something else, go grab a snack, go for a walk, and then come back to the image with fresh pair of eyes. You know, come back to the image later on when you're back, or even days later, and decide if the edit still looks good after you've taken some time with it. Because I've made that mistake before where I get really excited, I'm processing an image, and then I release it and realize I went like way too overboard, or you know, I was staring at the screen too long and the colors just don't look right. So it's really important. Take some time away from the photograph before you decide if that's your final edit or not. Super important. All right. So taking that vibrancy down just a little bit. I think that looks a little better. And then if you ever want to see the before and after of your photograph, just type or click the / key right there. All right, that's looking good so far. We're going to do more here. And I think let's play around a little bit with the color grading tool. This is one of my favorite new tools in Lightroom. I was going to do a video on this, but I didn't end up doing it. I'm sure a lot of you have played with the color grading tool already, but if you haven't, it's really fun. It allows you to adjust the highlights, the midtones, and the shadows individually, color-wise, and actually luminance-wise as well. If we go ahead and just pull one of these colors out from the color wheel, so if I take this middle point and I drag this out towards orange, you'll notice that the highlights are getting warmer. We're getting more orange. Of course, you can also make the highlights blue, which looks very odd. I tend to find the most natural results are when you bring a little bit of warmth into the highlights and then some cooler tones into the midtones or shadows. I've found doing the opposite, it tends to yield some pretty weird results, but you can try it if you want. This is just a great way of adding a little bit of, in a sense, split toning, just bringing in individual colors into those different luminance values. I feel like it might be nice for this image to just bring a little bit of blue into the midtones, some warmth into the highlights. Yeah, very subtle. All right. And then you can play around with the blending and the balance as well to get some different results. All right, noise reduction. We are going to need a little bit of noise reduction here just for the foreground when we bring up the foreground detail, because we're going to want to bring up the shadows here a little bit and brighten just the foreground up. I don't really need to brighten the sky up at all. But we'll go ahead and apply the noise reduction when we've actually made that adjustment. So from here, we're going to now play around with more fun tools. The global edits, like the things that are done to the entirety of the photograph, are, for me, a little less exciting than doing radial gradients, linear gradients, and the brush tool. So we're going to use a graduated filter here, graduated filter. And I'm going to make a big soft graduated filter that goes from the bottom towards kind of right here in the sky. And just click and drag this. And I'm going to bring up the exposure a bit. Bring up the shadows a bit as well. And play around with that placement. And I tend to make these gradients pretty soft. All right. Now let's go ahead and zoom in here and see how the noise looks. I mean, honestly, it's fine on the D. Even without any noise reduction, this looks fine. So maybe we don't need any noise reduction, actually. That's interesting. Oh, sorry, I totally dodged the storage system question. I use a RAID system. So I've got a RAID system down here. It's a Acer? Is it Acer? Acera? Acera. I think it's called Acera. Anyways, there's a bunch of hard drives stored in that RAID system. They're all 8 terabyte hard drives. And there's redundancy. So if the RAID system fails, all I have to do is put in a new hard drive and then it'll rewrite everything. And then for travel, I have a bunch of portable hard drives. So like just Western Digital USB-C hard drives, 4 terabyte. And I have many of them. But that's kind of my system at the moment. All right. I noticed there's a lot of questions coming in. I'm going to keep going on this edit. I promise I'm going to answer a bunch of questions once we're done processing. I'll try and answer a few of these as we go as well. Okay. I'm thinking I'm going to add a little bit more blue into this photograph. Just a hint of blue on the temperature. Maybe a little bit of magenta, a few notches. Take a look at the before and after. Looking good. So I'm gonna bring more brightness into the horizon, and I'm actually gonna vignette the image a little bit. Right now, I'm probably gonna go back on a little bit of this dynamic range that I brought into the photograph, because I do want to really bring the viewer's eye into kind of this middle area of the photograph. The first thing I'm going to do is re-add a vignette into the image, but it's going to be a selective vignette using the radial filter. And I actually made a video about this not too long ago. And I'm going to make a very big soft radial gradient. And I'm going to bring the exposure down a little bit just to start. Really darken that top of the sky. Now, the problem with this is it looks pretty good on the sky, but it's looking pretty dark towards the foreground here. I don't really like that aspect of it. Now, there's two different ways we could adjust this. We could use the brush tool and brush out the area of the foreground. That might be the easiest thing to do, but we can also use a range mask. And range masks are one of my favorite tools in Lightroom, if not my favorite tool in Lightroom. And it allows you to adjust the luminosity, certain luminosities of your photograph using, sorry, let me restart that. Basically the range mask allows you to adjust the brighter tones in this adjustment, or just the shadows of this adjustment, or even the midtones of this adjustment. So if I just click luminance here, show luminance mask, everything in red is what we're going to be selecting. So right now you can see we're selecting the top of the sky and the bottom of the foreground. Just to answer this question, I am in Adobe RGB, I believe. But I've heard people work in ProPhoto as well. Either or should be fine. So you can see I'm adjusting some of the foreground here. Actually, I'm adjusting more of the foreground than the sky, it seems. If we pull the range mask down, we're just going to be targeting the shadows of the photograph. If we pull this point up, we're going to be targeting more of the highlights and the midtones. So let me show you what that looks like, and watch the red down here at the bottom. The red down here in the bottom is going to start disappearing. And there we go. So you can still see there's a tiny bit of red here, but it's mostly targeted towards that top area of the photograph because the foreground down here is much darker than the sky. And then from here we can move this mask around, and you can see it's still only targeting the sky rather than the foreground. So it's just a nice way to get a little bit more targeted with your adjustments and make a vignette that is only hitting certain areas. Rather than just a big dark circle around your image, you can get really targeted here. And you can also play with any of these adjustments, so adding contrast, clarity, you can increase the shadows of that adjustment if you only want it to be hitting the midtones. And then you can even take the brush tool here and you can brush in more or brush out areas of the mask. So super handy tool. Yeah, it goes far beyond just radial gradients. I mean, it's nice to apply these techniques, like it's nice to apply a brush tool, a gradient, but it's all about targeting that gradient so that it's doing exactly what you want it to do. All right, let's look at our before and after. I think adding that vignette is nice because it does bring your eye a little bit more into the photograph. But now I'm going to add one more radial gradient, and this one's a little bit different than the previous ones. I'm actually going to bring a little bit of light into the foreground, and I'm going to try and soften, or sorry, not the foreground, the horizon, and I'm actually going to soften the horizon a little bit. What's the benefit of making global edits in Lightroom versus Adobe Camera Raw? There is none. Zero. They are the same program, essentially. Lightroom, I prefer the interface a little bit more, and I use the cataloging options that are not available in Adobe Camera Raw, but they are essentially the same algorithm for everything. So if you use Adobe Camera Raw, this will apply pretty much exactly the same. All right, so we're going to use a radial filter here, and this time I'm going to go from the horizon, and I'm going to extend this out so it's very thin, kind of like that. We can always adjust this further if we want. And you'll notice as I start playing with these sliders, it's affecting what's on the outside of the circle. This time we want to affect what's on the inside of the circle, so we're just going to click invert. And from here, I'm actually going to bring in some negative dehaze. So I'm just going to take the dehaze down. I'm going to soften this up a little bit. Bring in more feather as well to make this even softer. No, I was not just in La Jolla. This was a while ago. This was like October, November. But my family lives there, so I was visiting, and it's where I'm from as well. So got this nice little sunset at the potholes. So now I'm going to add some contrast into here because the dehaze slider, it does remove a bit of contrast, but it also softens up the edges. So I don't want it to remove the contrast though. I just want those soft edges. So I am going to bring contrast back in, and I'm actually going to take the clarity slider and bring that down a little bit. And I find that the combination of negative dehaze, negative clarity, and then making a few adjustments to the temp, the tint, and the contrast adds a really nice effect. And if I move this, you can see how it adds a little soft glow into the horizon, similar to what you would achieve by doing dodging and burning in Photoshop. But it's just a nice way of doing it here in Lightroom. Add a little bit of warmth there, a little bit of magenta as well. Cool. All right. When do you decide to move a photo over to Photoshop other than staying in Lightroom? Funny enough, we're going to move this image into Photoshop pretty much right now because I'm going to take this edit that we applied to this image and we're going to apply it to this photo right here, which of course has the foreground in focus. So I guess to answer your question, because I didn't really answer it, I go into Photoshop when I want to do a few different things. I go into Photoshop when I need to exposure blend a photo, focus stack a photo, really heavily tweak a panorama, or when I want to do very selective dodging and burning. I find that the dodging and burning process in Photoshop is much more enjoyable than in Lightroom, at least for myself. I'll do a little bit of brush work here in Lightroom using the range mask, but if I really have to use the pen tool, or sorry, use the pen on a tablet, I'll do most of that in Photoshop. So I'm going to take this edit right here, copy all of these settings, and apply them to this photo. Let's see what that does. So you'll notice the exposure's a little different here. We should be able to match these if I highlight both, starting with this one, and then highlight this one. I'm just holding down Control, and we should be able to go to Settings and then match total exposures. And what's really cool about this tool is now if we click from this image to this image, Lightroom has analyzed the exposure and matched the exposure to be the same. Super handy tool if you need to do any sort of blending and things like that. So we're going to highlight both of these photographs, right click, edit in, and open as layers in Photoshop. Let's see, which is better, easier focus stacking first, and then edit the final image, or edit one and then copy it to the others and then focus stack. Generally, I will do my edits to the photograph first so that I can do that at a raw level and retain the most amount of detail in the photograph. I try to do as much as I can before stacking the image. It's usually just a bunch of Lightroom edits, and then I'll stack the photo and then do the final edits in Photoshop. Why not focus stack and exposure? Yeah, pretty much exactly what I said. I like to do the edits first just so I'm retaining that raw detail. You can do a little bit of focus stacking using smart objects, but it gets into a whole another territory that I'm probably going to have to explain in a different video. This is just a lot more simple. So for focus stacking, there's a few things we need to do here. We need to align these photographs here. So I'm going to highlight both of them. Go up to, it should be Edit, Auto Align Layers. And I usually just select Auto. It's the easiest thing to do. And I haven't tried this with this image. I'm hoping Photoshop does a good job. Kind of did an okay job aligning them. Let's see how this looks. Let's see if we need to do anything manually here. Sometimes Photoshop does a great job aligning things, and then other times it does not do a great job. I'm going to undo that. Because unfortunately, Photoshop did not do a good job aligning these two photographs right now. Oh, how many times did I click this? All right. I think we're going to just do this manually. So instead of doing the Photoshop align, which usually will work, I mean, it's going to work for most of your images since it's, for whatever reason, not wanting to work with this photograph. What's nice is I'm only working with 2 layers. So I shot this image at f16, and all I have to do is split the image in 2 to get the focus in the foreground from this image and in the background from this image. If I was to have to work with like 10 different images here, I think this would be a real pain to do manually. But it's okay since it's only 2. What I'm going to do here is I'm actually just going to manually align these. And I'm not going to do it perfectly, but I'm going to do it well enough to where it's going to be pretty easy for me to just brush on the second image. And we're going to use the difference blend mode for this. And basically the difference blend mode is showing you the difference between the 2 photographs, which is really cool. It's a super handy tool to have. So if we start to move these images, you can see where the outline is changing. And I'm basically just going to try and align the foreground here. Looks like this one's a little bit closer up because of the focus breathing of the lens. So I think we're just going to free transform this down a little bit. It's funny, this image is so much more complicated than I thought it was going to be. Use this difference blend mode here. It's kind of good that I'm having to troubleshoot this photograph live. Okay, so that's looking better. We just need to free transform this a little bit more. It's a little smaller. Okay, that's looking pretty good. Go back into difference and then align these 2. Okay. Look at that. That's going to work. That's so much better than what Photoshop did. Okay. So we can pretty easily blend these now. You can blend these by just using the erase tool, but the best thing to do is to create a mask, which is going to allow you to reveal what's below this image without actually removing part of this layer. So to make a mask, you just click right here, add layer mask. And right now the layer mask is white, meaning it's not doing anything. You're still seeing this top layer. If I start to paint on with black, I'm going to reveal that bottom layer. So to do that, I'm going to find where the focus stops. Couldn't you just drop the opacity and then line them up? That's going to be very, very hard to do, and not going to show. It's not going to show the edges as much as using the difference blend mode, I've found. So I'm going to use a 50% hardness here. We're going to use 100% opacity, brush on with black. And I'm going to find where the focus, where this image gets out of focus. Probably right about here. Oh, would the Photoshop align the function align better? You know what? That's a really good question. Let's try it out. Okay, so now that I did the manual alignment, let's see if Photoshop works. That's a really good tip. Okay, auto align, auto, leave everything alone. Let's see if it works. Yeah, I don't know why it doesn't like this photograph, but it's like pulling the foreground. That's really weird. I found that over the years, this align tool in Photoshop has actually gotten worse. I feel like it used to be better. Yeah, that's annoying. All right, go back on that. Okay. Bring our layer mask in. We're just going to paint out this foreground using black, 50% opacity. And I'm just going to brush in where I want to be in focus. Because I can see it starts to get out of focus here. Actually, that makes it more out of focus right here. But right about here, you can see, or no, right about here. There we go. And once I've made this edge, I'm just going to go ahead and turn this layer off. And there's the rest that I just need to kind of, you know, paint out. So I'm going to now just take a hard brush, large size, and I'm just going to kind of simply paint this bottom out. And then with a soft brush, I'm going to soften this little area right here. And then do one more alignment. There we go. That's pretty good. As long as it's not noticeable, the stitching. Which I'm not seeing any edges here. For your own photography, usually you are going to not have to do this. This was a manual stitch that it's kind of like one of those things where sometimes Photoshop just isn't going to work for the photograph. The wave irritates the alignment. It shouldn't though, because I mean the rest of the photograph, there's so much detail for Photoshop to work with here. Like so much detail in the foreground that the wave really shouldn't be an issue. I mean, especially since the horizon is going to be the same as well. But yeah, you could be right. Either way, we need to now take this image and crop it because we do have this edge. So if I go right here, go to the crop tool, and we're just going to crop the edges here. Another tip when you're shooting images like this is make sure to give yourself just a bit of breathing room for your composition. It's important to think about the crop that you might have to do to the photograph, because chances are you might have to do a little crop, you might need to correct the horizon, you might need to do a little bit of stitching, and it's a bummer when you compose an image perfectly in field and then you realize you have to crop out something really nice in post because of some technical error. All right, now that we're done with that very annoying stitching, we can do a little bit of dodging and burning, which is always fun. Why don't you use auto blend for stacking and then later fix the parts you don't like? The problem is auto blending for images like this where you only have 2 layers, like one for the background and one for the foreground, there's really no point in using auto. It's just easier to just do a very simple, like even a gradient in Photoshop would have worked. The auto blend feature works really well when you have like a bunch of images that you're trying to focus stack, and especially with complicated shapes that you might not be able to do with the brush tool. I think it's easier to use the tool and then fix whatever Photoshop messed up. But in this case, it was easier to just not go through that process, especially seeing how poorly the align feature worked here. Okay, so we're going to make a new layer here. Some people like to add 50% gray to their dodging and burning layers. Personally, I don't. It's mostly a visual thing where you can see the gray and see what you're brushing, but they do the same thing, 50%, and then you apply soft light or overlay. It gets rid of that middle gray. So my tips for dodging and burning. Well, first off, I like to use a tablet pen, and I have my tablet that my computer chair is currently sitting on the cord of. Oh, looks like I'm unplugging it from the computer. Anyways, I've got my tablet right here. This is a very old tablet, actually. It's got like a giant scratch in it. I've had this thing since 2013, 2000, might be 2012 or 2013, but it still works really well. And I like to brush on the image just with this pen, and I find it's a lot more selective than using a trackpad or the mouse. When you use auto align with an image, I find turning geometric distortion will solve the issue. I've actually found the opposite, to be honest with you. I've recommended people not do geometric distortion just because I don't think I've ever gotten a good result by using it, but it could just be an image by image case, you know. I found that it tries to warp the image, and then you end up getting an even warpier image, but again, I think it just could be a case-by-case basis on that. Like, certain images work with it, certain images don't. Maybe my images don't seem to work with it, though. For dodging and burning, I like to use soft light and overlay. And I find that soft light works really well when you're handling shadows. Like if you want to burn the image, I feel like soft light is a little better for handling the shadows. But if you want to dodge the image, what's nice about using overlay is it's going to add a little bit more contrast. It's going to add a little bit more pop to the dodge. So I find that using 2 layers, one at soft light for the burning and then maybe a little bit of the dodging, and then one that helps the colors and the tones pop by using overlay. So I'm going to start out with the overlay one. We're going to take a brush here. I like to use a small brush with 0% hardness and a low opacity. I usually go in between like 1 to 5, something like that. Right here. I don't want to right here. So random. I switched to PC, and there's always random stuff that's happening with my PC. Okay, so with dodging and burning, you can dodge with white, and that's going to brighten up your photograph, and then you can burn with black to darken your photograph. But you can also brush in colors too. So I think what might be nice for this image is to brush in some nice sort of warm peachy tones across these ridges in the foreground. So I'm going to grab this nice peachy color, do a little bit of dodge in here with overlay. You can use a different flow, like you can use a lower flow percentage and use the different brush pressures on your pen. Personally, I find it easier to just kind of sketch with the pen and just like click multiple times as I'm brushing, because that's what I would normally be doing if I was like drawing on a piece of paper. So I just find that process of just brushing multiple times across the areas I want to highlight is a little bit more intuitive than playing with the brush pressure. And then if I click this on and off, there. And if you're doing this to your own photograph, it is important to be a little bit more selective. You might consider zooming into the photograph. One question, do I use luminosity masks? I do, but not as much as I used to. I honestly probably haven't used luminosity masks for an image in, it's probably been months since I've used luminosity masks. Lately, I've just been trying to keep it simple. And now we're just kind of brushing along these reflections here. We can brush along this reflection too. Actually, let's switch over to white. I'm probably not going to bring up these pools too much because I think the more we bring this up, it's going to be a little bit too unnatural. So I'm going to keep these pools pretty dark, but I do want to bring them up ever so slightly, probably just around these edges, because you can see a bit of the reflection in here, which is nice. So just a little bit of brushing there, not too much. And then I want to brush in some brightness along this darker area of the foreground because this spot got a little dark. So I'm using a bigger soft brush here. Just kind of brushing along here. Yeah, that's looking pretty good. This is kind of where I have the most fun processing images is when I'm just brushing and just kind of having fun with the photograph. I mean, it's fine applying sliders and whatnot, but you know, this is more enjoyable to me than the other part of it. A little bit of brushing on the clouds. We can give a little bit of light into the horizon as well. I'm going to make another layer. Let's name this dodge Horizon. Horizon. Spelled that right. Oh, can you guys hear me? Did my mic die? Am I good? Let me know if you can still hear me. Sorry if the mic cut out. This is the first time I'm doing a live stream, so there might be some technical issues. All right, we're going to brush on the horizon here, and I'm going to use a pretty warm color. I'm going to use soft light this time. Let's try soft light. And I'm just brushing along this horizon. And what's funny as I'm brushing, it probably doesn't look like I'm doing anything, but once I click the little eyeball button, it should be pretty noticeable, the change that I'm making here. Just brush along here. Maybe a slightly higher opacity would be good. I'm going to go to 7%. Okay, let's see what that did. It'd be funny if it didn't do anything. Okay, there we go. So just kind of giving some light into the horizon. And what's nice about these adjustments is if you find you're doing your dodging and burning and you're like, oh my gosh, I went so overboard. This is way too much, like way too much light into the horizon. You can just take the opacity down. And now we've got 50% of that adjustment. And let's say you wanted more of that adjustment. Let's say you were like, I should have been brushing a lot more. You can copy and paste that layer. And now we've got double the effect. So there's a lot of ways to do these adjustments and make the effect stronger or make the effect a little bit more subtle. You can always adjust what you're doing afterwards. Can you do before and after you're done with a layer? Yeah. So that's kind of what we're doing here with this layer. This was our other dodge and burn layer. And actually, let's see, if I copy this layer, let's see what that looks like stronger. Maybe with just a little bit more, like a 15% opacity increase on there. Okay, I think for this image, I'm going to do one more thing, and then we can move on to another photograph, do just a quick edit, and then we'll do some Q&A. I am going to do a little bit of Orton glow. Actually, I'm going to do one more thing. Sorry. I'm going to I'm going to clone out this little spot right there. You guys everyone's probably been staring at that little spot like, is he going to remove that? I'm going to merge all of these layers down into a brand new layer. So I'm going to take everything we did, make a new layer out of it. On PC, it's going to be, so it's always an annoying hotkey. It's Alt, Windows, Control, Shift, E. And then on Mac, it is Command, Option, Shift, E, I believe. They really need to make that a shorter command key. Okay, so we have our stack, and this stack is going to be nice because it's going to also the overexposed part of the middle of the sky is annoying. That part's not overexposed at all, actually. We're completely in gamut with that. Let's see. Go to info. Yeah, I mean, we're not hitting 255 with any of that. Yeah, we're not even close to 255. Yeah, we're good on that spot in the horizon. That's not overexposed. And I like it brighter in the horizon. I mean, a lot of processing comes down to personal preference, you know? Like, you can take and apply these techniques that I'm using, and however you see fit, however you see beneficial, you can apply it to your own images. So we are going to go ahead and just clone these little spots out. I like to use the spot healing brush. I find it to be the easiest tool for just removing little elements. So just little things, little blemishes we want to remove, little spots. Maybe this little spot right here is a little too bright. Right there. Zoom in here. And just kind of go in. Oops, we're on the brush tool now. Let's go in. Just kind of grab these spots. And this little spot right here is a little bit bright. So actually, I am going to make one more layer and burn that out. Oops. I'm just going to burn this little spot right here. Make it a little bit darker. It's looking a little bright. I'm using the mouse right now. I'm not sure why I'm using the mouse. If I had more time, I'd probably, you know, if I was making a longer edit for this photograph and spending a lot more time, like spending an extra hour or two, I'd probably go through and tweak a few of these things. But, you know, for the sake of this, I want to move on to another image. What we're going to do now, I'm just going to merge these two and do our Orton effect. I'm out of focus. What do you mean I'm out of focus? I'm definitely not out of focus. It's 100% clean in focus. Or I'm out of focus like me as in the camera. That, because that could be the case, but my image is not out of focus. Okay, so we're gonna make an Orton glow here. We're gonna copy this, and it's gonna give a nice soft look to the sky. And I'm going to apply it selectively. Oh, I'm out of focus? I wonder how I got out of focus. Sorry, guys. Well, I may just have to be a little bit out of focus. Let's see. I'm going to apply a Gaussian blur here to this image, and personally I like to apply, it's usually anywhere between like 10 to 20%, but it's going to depend on the resolution of your camera. And when it comes to adding the blur, I guess a general rule of thumb is if you can't tell what the image is anymore, the blur is far too strong. And if you can still make out all the details, the blur isn't enough. So somewhere in between here, like that, where you can tell what the image is, but you don't see any of the details. Like, so right now we're at 23. That's going to work great. And then I like to do image adjustments, brightness and contrast, and crank the contrast all the way up. And you can also add a little bit of brightness too. I probably wouldn't go over 10% for that. Sorry. Yeah, there's a lot of things that are going to change for the live streams. I only have one monitor and we're going from program to program, so every once in a while there might be something that's a little missing. So sorry about that if the video was blocking what I was doing, but all I did was go to image, or sorry, all I did was go to where did I go? Image adjustments, and then brightness and contrast. So those are that's the movement I went to get to this spot. So opacity, I like to go anywhere from 5 to 10%. I find anything higher is a little too glowy, but again, it's personal preference. So, you know, you can go further if you'd like, but if you start to go further, you see the image gets really, really glowy. So, you know, use your own discretion when it comes to these tools. And what I like to do with this tool is only apply it to things that are far out in the distance, like the sky, like the horizon. I find that the glow looks a little unnatural when it's hitting the foreground elements. So what I'm going to do here is make a mask, and I'm going to use a gradient for the mask so that it's only targeting the sky and the horizon rather than the foreground. And so right now we did the opposite. It's targeting the foreground and not the sky. So all we need to do is invert this mask by using Control-I or Command-I on a Mac. And there we go. Now we have that bit of glow. We can go ahead and zoom in, and you can see what that glow does. It just adds a nice look to the horizon. We can even take that opacity down a bit. Okay, so here is our final edit here. Yeah, nice little hour edit going on. And then if we go to Lightroom and just look at our, we can go ahead and look at the before. So here's our before. You know, great sunset, but, you know, some details that need to be worked on, some color work that needs to be done, and definitely brightening up that foreground. And then our final edit that really just punches those colors and allows you to really see the nice ridges here in the foreground. Okay. Here, I'm going to pop open the video thing. Let's see if I can get myself in focus real quick. All right. We are in focus. Good to go. Okay. That probably looked so weird. I'm going to have to edit that out when I actually put out the video. If I wasn't explaining things, how long would it take me to do this? I'm not really sure. I like to go slow when I'm editing images, you know? I've got my coffee, I just kind of chill, process things very slowly. I'm definitely trying to speed things up for this this tutorial. So honestly, but I am spending time like stopping to answer questions. So I would say probably the same amount of time it would take me if I was doing this alone. Yeah, I'm going to post this live video on the channel afterwards, so you can totally go see it after. Okay. This image. I like this one. I wanted to just do a quick edit on this one. Nothing crazy. You know, since we went through the last photograph, I probably don't need to go into depth with this one, but I haven't tried processing this one, and I was really excited about it when I shot it. So I think it would be fun to just do a basic edit on this. First thing, take down the highlights a little bit, bring up the exposure a little bit because we are very underexposed for this image, which is fine. I'm just going to bring up the shadows, bring up the blacks, and you know what I really like about this photograph? I love the light coming through here. This little strip of light that's coming through the canal and that leads you into the waves. I thought that was a really cool element to this image. What we need to do here though is really brighten up the foreground. I want to darken a little bit of the sky, and then I actually need to bring up the shadows here. I feel like these two rocks that jet out are a bit too dark as well. What monitor am I editing on? I'm using a BenQ monitor for this. It's nice, and I have it color corrected, so it works pretty well. Although I've been processing a lot of videos and photos on my Dell laptop, and that one is not as color corrected, so that one's been a little bit of a challenge. All right. Do you always go into Photoshop for edits, or do you do a lot of local adjustments and masking in Lightroom? I do. Almost anything that I can do in Lightroom, I try to do in Lightroom. It's just a little easier. So there are images that, maybe I won't even bring them into Photoshop, but most seascapes I've found I'll usually bring into Photoshop. Okay, for this photograph, I'm going to bring in some vibrance, like I did with the last one. And a little bit of saturation again. Take down the whites a bit. I feel like on the horizon the clarity is a little high, so we may remove some clarity on the horizon, kind of like what we did last time. Split toning. Yeah, I may try some split toning for this photograph. I think that might be nice. A little bit of slight cross-processing. As we brought in the shadow detail, I did bring in some noise, because with the shadows, I mean, we're pulling those up quite a bit. We probably raised up the foreground like 2 stops. I mean, if you look at that, pretty stark difference. So we'll need some noise reduction here. And I like to bring in the luminance. I try not to bring the noise reduction too far. Like 50 might be a little too far. The thing about photography is you kind of want a tiny bit of noise, or it's okay to have a tiny bit of noise. I mean, it's a photograph. It's okay if there's a little bit of grain in there. It just, having it be too noticeable is where it becomes an issue, where somebody's looking at noise. But if there's just a touch of grain in the photograph, I'm totally okay with that. So I don't need it too high. I'm thinking like 27 should work well for this. If you have any colorizations or anything, you can add some color into there. But honestly, just a little boost of the luminance here works great for this image. Oh yeah, I've got some presets here. I have some presets I've been releasing. Yeah, they're all on my website if you want to check those out. Okay. Remove chromatic aberration. If you were here earlier, you heard me talk about that. If not, you can go back and replay that part. Enable profile corrections. And I think my horizon's off on this too. I think I was just having one of those days where pretty much like all of my images were a little crooked horizon-wise. There we go. All right. Looking at this, should we add a little bit of warmth in here? A little bit more warmth. It kind of helps the warm tones in the clouds pop a little bit more. Do I use any third-party software for sharpening and denoise? Topaz? I don't. But I do use Topaz for upscaling images when printing. I do like their software for upscaling, but I don't use their noise reduction or sharpening, frankly, because the noise reduction has always been really good for me here in Lightroom. I haven't really needed anything different. I'd give it a go though, if it's a good program. I think from here we can start doing just a few quick radial filters and graduated filters. So just a nice soft one for the sky. I'm going to take the brush tool, go to the erase, and erase it out of the foreground here. There we go. And sometimes with the vignette, what I've found is helpful is also to apply a little bit of cooler tonality into the vignette. So you can bring in a little bit of blue. And sometimes that looks nice because as things get darker, sometimes they get a little bit more muddy. Now I'm going to use the brush tool, and I'm going to bring up a little bit of clarity here in these ridges, and then also maybe I should probably brighten the bottom part of this image a little bit as well. We got a few questions coming in. When the tripod sinks into the sand, that's when I find yeah, that's a good one. When your tripod is sinking into the sand, sometimes the horizon gets a little lopsided. Do you typically focus stack images like this, or do you find f16 is enough? I mean, for an image like this, it gets a little blurry on the edge, but this image, I'm okay with a tiny bit of blur on the edges. Like I don't need everything to be completely tack sharp, but I do want most of the image to be in focus from front to back. So for this image, having this area be pretty in focus, tack sharp here, and then, perfectly in focus in the background, that's enough for me. With the other pothole image, where more was out of focus, that's when I wanted to do a little bit of that focus stack. So we're going to use a gradient tool here, brighten up the foreground a bit. And I'm just going to use exposure, and not much either, like 0.5 of a stop almost. And let's take the brush tool, brush in a little bit of clarity. Just to really highlight these ridges. And then I was mentioning I wanted to raise up the shadows here in the midground section, so I'm going to do that. We're just going to use the brush tool, brush along here. And first thing we're going to do is bring up the shadows a bit, bring up the blacks a bit to soften that up. And then we're going to take a range mask with luminance, and we're going to target just the shadows of this selection. Was this shot on a tripod? Yes, it was. This was shot on a tripod. Yep, 0.4 of a second, f16, ISO 200. Can't remember why I was on ISO 200 instead of 100, but it doesn't matter. Let's show the luminance mask here. So right now we're targeting more of the highlights and the shadows. We're going to pull this down, and there you go. Now we're pretty much only targeting the shadows of that adjustment. So just kind of bringing up these tones a bit so that they're a little softer, which I find helpful. And we had this, I believe we made a radial adjustment here. I'm going to take the exposure down a bit. And then I'm going to soften the horizon using another radial filter here. Little bit of negative dehaze, and we're going to affect what's on the inside of the circle instead of what's on the outside. Bring in a bit of contrast, a little bit of negative clarity there. And then maybe just one more, just a little bit of brushing here for the highlights. Bring these highlights down ever so slightly. Take down the highlights and the whites. And use the range mask for luminance. Show luminance mask. This time we're only going to affect the highlights of this adjustment. And there we go. Just taking down those highlights right in the sky. Okay. Oh, and I think we were going to try a little bit of color grading for this image as well. F16, I don't trust Canon lens to shoot anything higher than F11, but I have a cheap lens. Yeah, what was I shooting this with? The Nikon 16-35. Yeah, I have no problem shooting F16 with this lens. I'll shoot F16 on most of my lenses though. And I haven't noticed a drastic difference. You know, like I haven't noticed shooting f16 makes the images soft, but yeah, it's probably lens by lens. So if you do have a lens that you don't trust, maybe maybe stick with not shooting f16. Use exposure, not brightness. Is that what I used? Yeah, I mean, whatever works. Exposure, brightness, whatever's going to work for the targeted, adjustment. It depends. Okay, so for the highlights, we're going to add just a little bit of warmth. A little bit of warmth there. I usually like orange for these color grading adjustments. You can use something more magenta, or you could probably make a pretty interesting edit by going more like cyan with the sky too. But I think for this one, just stick with orange. And for this one, we can go a little bit more blue, the midtones. You can also adjust the luminance here too, which is nice. You could see the luminance of the highlights go down a little bit, and the luminance of the midtones. You can add blue into the shadows too. You got to be a little careful. I find adding a little bit of blue to the midtones is a little bit more forgiving than adding it straight into the shadows. I do love these color wheels though. These color wheels, they're taken from video editing essentially. Like they were using these color wheels in I believe they had them in Premiere before this, or maybe it was a different editing program that was using it, but I remember using these color wheels before they introduced it into Lightroom. This color grading panel replaced the split toning panel that used to be here. And split toning, it was fine, but there wasn't enough control over the colors and the tones. I found that it was such a limited tool that I almost never used split toning. But now that you have the ability to affect the midtones, highlights, and shadows, you can go to pretty much any color on the wheel, and then also play around with the blending and balance. It's such a great tool now. All right, I think that's gonna wrap it up for this edit. So let's do a little bit of Q&A now. Unless you have any more questions about this edit or any of these seascape images. I think we've been processing for about an hour 20, something like that. So I am using a tablet for the dodging and burning and whatnot in Photoshop, but I mean usually if I'm just kind of like playing around in Lightroom, I'm using a mouse too. I find that using calibration before color grading works really well. Calibration is nice, and what he's mentioning is down here, the bottom panel. Calibration allows you to get some interesting, funky color combinations. So if we move the hue of blue primary down, you can see how that starts to shift those blues more towards cyan, and the red and the kind of oranges more towards red. You can get some really interesting effects this way. I find it to be a little bit more select. Like it's something I probably wouldn't apply to every image. It's something that I'd use more selectively. But yeah, you can get some really interesting stuff by using the calibration tool as well. Let's see here. Any big summer projects besides doing some more vlogs, tutorials? Not too much, to be honest. Waiting to get vaccinated and then probably travel more. That's about it. Yeah, maybe go see my family. Yeah, thanks so much everyone for joining this. I hope it worked out. Sorry about the slight technical issues with the camera. This Nikon just kept wanting to shut off. Did I focus this image 1/3 into the frame? Yeah, probably around these rocks over here is where I focused. Probably right around here. But then using the f16 was enough to pull focus across the photograph. Oh, and, you know, if I was finishing this image off, I would apply a little bit of sharpening as well. Do I make specific edits for print? Yeah. I find usually I go brighter with prints. And, you know, actually, this is an interesting tip for processing your images. You can change the background on Lightroom and on Photoshop. Right now, we're using gray. But look at how different the image looks when we switch to white. Like now the image, it appears much darker given the background. And if we switch to black, it's almost a completely different viewing experience. So sometimes when I'm processing images, I'll bounce between a few of them. Like looking at this now on white, it actually looks a little dark. Like maybe I would go through now and boost, you know, a little bit of the exposure. I find that for prints, you have to be very careful of this. Prints can come out very dark. If you think they look good on a screen, I'd boost the brightness up a little bit. Do I apply sharpening in Photoshop? Yes, I do. Yeah, I use the TK action panel. I think it's called the TK action panel. Tony Kuiper. If you want some great sharpening actions, Tony Kuiper has some awesome ones. Alex Nail, who is a very talented photographer, also has a sharpening panel for Photoshop. I sometimes apply some sharpening here in Lightroom though, and that works really well. But for web sharpening, like any, you know, JPEG files that I'm going to upload onto Facebook or something, usually Photoshop is the best place to sharpen your images. Before and after of the last picture. You mean this one right here? If you want to see the before and after for this one. Whoa, Lightroom's going crazy. There we go. It's really dark. Looking at it on a white background, this image looks so dark. But what's funny is it that dark? I mean, the histogram was pretty dark. I really underexposed this photograph, but whatever works. Love the troubleshoot on alignment. I didn't expect that to. I was like, Photoshop is going to stitch this right away. There's going to be no problems. But I found that anytime I do anything live or for like a presentation, that's when the issues come about. Like if I was going to do this alone in an hour, it's going to work perfect. But it's as soon as you go live that something's going to go wrong. How often do you edit images on Photoshop? Do you use third-party luminosity masks? If so, which one? Yeah, so I am definitely going to do luminosity masks in a different video just because it's going to take a long time to go over everything. But just to show you what I use, here's the panel. So I use the TK combo and the rapid masks. This is all part of the TK panel. I think it's about $35. And I use the web sharpen application right here. Luminosity masks are right here. There might be an updated version. I think there might be V7 out now. But yeah, I've been using Tony Kuiper's stuff for years. Works great. Highly recommend. And it's cheap, like $35 for this like awesome panel is great. I feel like most third-party applications for like video editing and things are upwards of $100 usually. Usually use unsharp mask. Is TK action better? Better. It's more fine-tuned. So when you apply sharpening using something like an unsharp mask, I would assume you resize your image and then you apply the unsharp mask after or before. What's nice about the TK panel is it uses an advanced algorithm to resize the image in sections and sharpen each one of those sections so you can really retain detail in areas that were like really fine-tuned, sharpened areas and on the bigger edges. I found that a lot of times when you're trying to sharpen photographs using just the unsharp mask, it sharpens more of the bigger areas of tonal contrast rather than like those fine, tiny little details like waves and things like that. Let's see. I'm so bad at reading, so I'm trying to go through the live chat. When you view photos on your phone versus the computer, do they look different? It seems my blues are way off. When comparing from phone to screen, can't seem to resolve the issue. Yeah, that's a... You know what's interesting? I feel like most people are probably viewing images on... They're probably viewing images on an iPhone. Let's be real. Or maybe like a MacBook Pro, I'm assuming. So it's interesting, you know, I have this color corrected screen that I spent time to color correct, and I color correct it every month, and then, you know, I'm trying to get it perfect here, but it does look different on a phone. So I found I'll export this image and then be ready to post it onto Instagram, and it looks so much different on the iPhone. And I will go through and use Instagram's little like sliders to change the image slightly to make it look more like what I did on my computer, but on my phone. So that's an interesting topic. I mean, it's like it's good to compare your images on in multiple places and see what looks the best for all of the devices, maybe. Yeah, that's an interesting one, though. People are looking at your image on different screens, in different light, and at different brightness values. Yeah. Let's see. Have you thought about building a catalog of sky images for swaps? We're doing approaching blue sky. I personally don't have a problem with anyone who wants to swap skies. It's just not my thing. I like to go out and shoot, and whatever the sky gives me, that's what I'm going to work with that day. Like I'll do blends of, like I'll do time blends, like I'll have the foreground and then the sky gets a little better like a minute or two later or something, and I can blend those together. But I generally keep it to the event, like keep the same sky for the event that's happening and in the direction it's happening, especially since I'm doing these vlogs. And so it'd be kind of weird if like I did a vlog and it's blue sky and I'm like, hey guys, I'm here and it's blue sky, and then all of a sudden there's just blazing sunset over it. Be kind of funny. But you know, for anyone who wants to do that, like it's your art, do what you want to do. You know, no one can control what you do for photography. You're the only person who has that control, and it just comes down to what's your artistic statement, really. Have I tried any of the magnetic filters for case? I actually have them in my bag right now, and they just shipped to me a few days ago. So I'm talking with Case Filters about potentially doing a video. We will see. But they're pretty nice. They're pretty nice filters. I was like, these are decent. I haven't really tested the quality, but I like the build, the design of it and everything. All right. Let's see what else we've got here. I find it so hard to edit and find something that looks similar on all devices. Yeah, seriously. I'm the same way. That's a challenge. You know, I do process and edit my images on this screen, and I think I want it to look the best on the computer and when somebody's looking at my website and when somebody gets a print, but I do want them to still look good if somebody's just kind of browsing their phone. So I do have to balance that out a little bit and make different edits for different platforms. Yeah. I would love to see a video. Oh my gosh. This is from Nick C talking about macro photography. And that is definitely going to be a new video in the future. I am super excited about macro photography. I did it a lot back in college and when I was getting started, and I just haven't had a macro lens since then. But what I want to do is a video where I go through Golden Gate Park and just go play around with a macro lens. Also, is my face really bright? I'm looking at the live stream. My face is probably pretty overexposed, isn't it? Well, can't change that now. Anyways, going back to it though. Yeah, I really want to do a macro video. I think it would be a lot of fun. I'm currently in the process of potentially switching my camera system, so I haven't invested in a macro lens yet. But I want to go around Golden Gate Park and just capture the different textures, foliage of the plants and things. Yeah. You know why I'm overexposed? It's because the sun came out. Hold on a minute. There we go. Let me know if that's better. I think when I started this stream, it was foggy outside, and now it's like bright blue sky. Okay, let's see what we got here. Sorry if I missed your questions. Just if I miss your question, just ask it again, or you can ask it in the comments. I'll get to it. I saw you using 100 to 400 Sigma. What are your thoughts on this lens? Yeah, I've been using it a lot recently, and I really like it. Is it the sharpest lens in the world? No, not even close. And there's definitely been situations where I've gotten some slightly soft images, but it was only $500, and it gives me this incredible range, and it's worked in almost every situation. It's not massive. It's exceeded my expectations for how much I paid for that lens. Like, I wasn't about to spend like $3,000 or $2,000 or $3,000 on a massive lens like that, you know? So it works great. What apps do I use to predict clouds? Predict clouds? Well, I don't really predict clouds. I check the weather. I use, for the US here, I use NOAA, just the government's website for weather, and I go into the hourly mode, and I check the graphs. Actually, you know what? We can do that here. NOAA San Francisco. Let's see what the weather's like today. San Francisco. All right, so hourly weather forecast. This is what I check right here. Gives me sky cover, precipitation, wind, temperature. I use other apps like Windy is good. There's a few others that work really well, but I'm really a fan of just checking the weather here. And then you can check webcams too. Webcams work pretty well too. Let's see. Yes. Good tip from Dylan. Make sure when you're doing these edits. Now, if you're trying to post something online, make sure your exports out of Lightroom or Photoshop are in sRGB, not in ProPhoto, not in Adobe RGB. You can work in Adobe RGB or ProPhoto, but do not export in sRGB, or else your colors are going to come out different. You want sRGB stands for screen, red, green, and blue. So yeah, make sure your sRGB. In Lightroom, you can it shows the color profile in your export, or if you're using Photoshop, you'll need to do it manually unless you're using an application like the Tony Kuiper panel, in which case if you sharpen your image, it will auto default to sRGB. Let's see. Do I do soft proofing ICC profiles for print? I mean, not really. I just kind of add a little bit of brightness, add a little bit of sharpening, and then, because I'm not printing images myself right now, I'm sending them off to places. So, you know, I just do a really basic print edit that includes a little bit more brightness. It's usually raising up the shadows a tiny bit, and then it's adding more fine-tuned sharpening to the image as well. I heard you have a Facebook group where you're like a mentor. Yeah, if So I have a Facebook group that it's basically for anyone who purchased the tutorials. I think you get auto invited in there. But honestly, if you're looking for just advice or anything like that, I'm happy to help. You could send me an email or something. I'm usually more than willing to critique an image or help out if I can. Can I come shoot with you next time you're in Hawaii, Honolulu? Yes. I would love to be there right now. That sounds so enjoyable. Being in Hawaii, just like relaxing. Do you know what the most fun thing ever is? You're just like standing, shooting seascapes at sunrise in board shorts and flip-flops and like a t-shirt. That's there's not too many places in the world where you can do that. And then right after you go grab like delicious poke or something like that. I mean, I love shooting in Hawaii. Let's see. I export in sRGB, but my photos still look way different after exporting. That's interesting. I wonder what's going on there. Yeah, I don't know. Make sure that you merge your layers before you switch over to the sRGB profile, or that you flatten the layers. I think it should auto flatten the layers though. I don't know. Let's see. Yeah. Do I print at home now? I print using, I've been using Bay Photo. They do a great job. I'm thinking about also checking out some other print providers, some of the more high-end print providers. But Bay Photo with the fine art papers does a great job. Wouldn't mind live streams more often. Very helpful. And you don't ignore the questions in the chat. I'm trying not to. It's a multitasking thing right here. You know, trying to go over everything. Let's see. Sorry, I want to make sure everything's still good. Everything still look good from your end? It's frozen on my screen for some reason. Do I mostly shoot when the sun is below the horizon? No, not really. I mean, I shoot pretty much either or. Like I shoot a lot during the day, just like randomly during the day, you know, blue sky. Pretty much every condition I like to shoot in. These just happen to be mostly after sunset. Although I was shooting, like some of these I was shooting like when the sun was still in the sky. Sorry, I'm going to refresh my little live chat on my phone. Well, thanks so much, everyone, for sticking around. 200 people still sticking around watching me ramble about nothing. Okay. When you export an image, do you export straight from Photoshop after you finish doing your sharpening editing, or do you export out of Lightroom? Most of the time, Photoshop. I find Photoshop has more tools for sharpening and things like that. But you can use Lightroom. It does a good job. You can get things to look much sharper if you use Photoshop or you're using a plugin in Photoshop, I find. Do I have any recommended motion gear for time-lapse? Or have I upgraded my motion gear for time-lapse? I still use the Dynamic Perception Stage 1 with the Emotimo head or the Dynamic Perception Sapphire head. I don't really use anything else for time-lapse. Reunion Island. Yeah, I'd love to go there. That's the one with the crazy statues, right? Let's see. How I organize catalog photos on my drives. Oh, for cataloging? Okay. My cataloging is very not intuitive, and it only works for me. I don't recommend it for anyone else, but every single time I go on a trip or like a section of time, I make a new Lightroom catalog. And the reason for this is I'm shooting images, I'm shooting time lapses, and I'm shooting a ton of time lapses. And if I was to have one catalog with everything, I'd probably have a few million images. It just doesn't work. So I have to separate things out. So I have different catalogs for each trip that I do, and I'll have to like have new hard drives for each one. It's a whole. For most people, you can get away with having like like maybe every year or so you make a new catalog. I think that's a better way of going about it if you're just doing photography. Doing time lapse just complicates everything, unfortunately. Yeah, this is recorded and it should be on my profile. Do I use a star tracker? Yes, I do. Not anymore as much, but I have the Vixen Polari system, and I've had it since 2012 now. Long time. I honestly haven't used it, though, in probably 3 or 4 years. Cameras are just getting so good, I usually just point my camera at the stars, and, The star tracker was better. I found it to be more useful for when I was using like a Canon 5D Mark II or Mark III, and I really needed those longer exposures to get enough detail. What's my favorite photo I've ever taken? I don't know if I have one. I like most of my images are from different experiences, and usually those experiences have memories that are enjoyable or shooting experiences that are special in some way, shape, or form. So I don't know if I could pinpoint like my favorite images. There's definitely a few that stick out to me. Like my Phoenix seascape that I shot was really special to me. I shot that one in like 2014. There's other images that I have like, I just remember those memories and they were just such fun images to capture, but I don't have any like super specific favorites. Do I use nodal rail at all? No, I do not. Any tips for storm photography? I don't know if I'm the best person to give storm photography tips. I have shot a decent amount of lightning storms, and for lightning storms, I like to just set my camera on a time-lapse mode using an intervalometer and just let the camera shoot. And also kind of follow the storm, like look at where the storm is moving and try and get in a position to get the storm going past the camera. Easier said than done in a lot of cases. But as far as like real storm chasing photography, I haven't done a lot of it. I've really only done like one true storm chasing trip. Somebody like Nick Page or Micah Blinsky, those guys, I mean, they're always out shooting storms. Have I done any exploring in the Lost Coast near Rockport? I've been out there briefly, like for a few sunsets, but I never got anything I really enjoyed. And honestly, I just didn't spend enough time out there exploring. But I would love to go back and spend some time out there. I think it's an underrated spot, the Northern California coast. Definitely something to do, maybe this summer. Have I ever thought about coming to Australia to photograph all of our diversity of landscapes? Yeah, definitely high on the list. Definitely something I want to do in the future when I can. NTFs, talking about turning images into NTFs for sale on the market. There were people discussing this on Clubhouse recently. I don't know anything about it. If I'm being honest, I haven't explored it. But I've heard it can be a good thing to do. I'm in my own little world. Let's see. Do you have any projects with Mr. Hardcastle again? I think the border is closed, right? Or is it still closed? I'm not sure. We were talking about meeting up again and you know, having a fun shoot and doing more video projects, because Gavin's a really fun person to shoot with, and even though on the videos we were just like arguing the whole time, we got along pretty good. I mean, it was a blast of a trip. So definitely something I would like to do this year if I can. Just make it up to Vancouver Island, or maybe if he ends up coming down, we'll see what happens, honestly. Let's see. Arkansas, you'll come to use sky replacements often. Never any clouds here. Do I use Meopes or lightning trigger? I do not. I'm sure they work great, but I just don't shoot lightning enough to buy one. The time-lapse modes have always worked perfect for me, though. Like just doing a 5 to 10 second exposure, grabbing the lightning strikes has always worked pretty well. Yes, this is my full-time job. I am a full-time landscape photographer, filmmaker. I do education and commercial projects as well. All right, do you use the time-lapse feature on the Nikon, or do you shoot time-lapses another way? I have the D810, and I'm trying to learn. I do have an intervalometer that plugs into the Nikon, and it works pretty well. But the intervalometer that's in the Nikon, that like the intervalometer interval settings, works really great. So any chance I get, I just use that. But you can use an external remote just the same. It's going to give you pretty much the same results. Let's see. Any workshops this year? Probably nothing this year. I don't think I'll be doing anything workshop-wise this year. Probably more like 2020, hopefully. Yeah, it's just been tough because I think if I was going to do anything this year, I would have had to plan it last year. And it's like, it was impossible to plan anything last year. So yeah, I'm looking more at 2020 with Marco Grazzi and maybe a few other people. Should be good. Any plans to come to India? Nothing at the moment. I really don't have plans to even leave my city at the moment. I'll be here in San Francisco, just filming more videos, trying to do more local landscape photography. Yeah, I think once I'm vaccinated and everything, I'll be able to take a look at possible travel ideas. But it's weird. I've spent so much time not traveling that I think it'd feel weird. Like I think it'd feel weird to hop on a plane after so long. Oh, did I say 20-something? 2020-something? Yeah, I meant 2022. Sorry. Yeah, workshops potentially in 2022, not in 2021. Yeah. Do I save my edited TIFFs back into the same location as the RAW file, or do I make a new folder? Yep, it's saved right with the RAW file on the same hard drive, so I'm always able to grab it from the Lightroom catalog, because if you open something up from Lightroom into Photoshop and then you save it, it's going to save back into Lightroom in the same location as your RAW files. Greenland cruise. Oh, interesting. There's a Greenland cruise with Nigel Danson and all the UK photographers. Well, I wasn't invited. No, I like Nigel a lot. I'm not sure what that is, but I'm sure it's going to be fun. Oh, man. Well, if anyone... Oh, Iceland. Yeah, no. I don't have anything... I don't really have anything planned. Again, I'm here in San Francisco. I'll be hanging out, doing processing and taking pictures of trees in Golden Gate Park, just staying local. I'm also trying to work on some new tutorials as well. you know, trying to put out like a brand new Lightroom Masterclass. I haven't released like a big processing tutorial since like probably 2017. And my Lightroom course was like back in 2015. So I really wanted to make like a bigger version of that that has just a ton of images. So I've been just spending a lot of time working on that. We'll see how it goes. Hopefully it's good. Yeah, I mean, for anyone... Oh, is Yosemite local enough for you? Yeah, it is actually. You know what's funny? My last trip to Yosemite was right before San Francisco went into lockdown. I literally went to Yosemite like a few days beforehand. It was crazy. And then right after we got locked down. But I would love to go back to Yosemite, spend some time there. It's a little tough in the summertime, though. It just gets so busy in Yosemite. I find it more enjoyable in the wintertime. Do I know any East Coast landscape photographers? I know more East Coast cityscape photographers than I do landscape photographers, but yeah, I guess there's a few East Coast landscape photographers, especially up in Maine. Have I ever been to Antarctica? No. No plans to go to Antarctica. I've never been. Yeah, I know a bunch of other photographers are going there, but yeah, it's not really on my list. Again, I can't even think about, like, I haven't thought about leaving, like, going 100 miles from here, let alone, you know, getting on a cruise ship and going to the end of the, like, the far end of the world, pretty much. Yeah. Oh, you're coming to San Francisco tonight to go shoot? Yeah, have fun. Be careful. If you're shooting in the city, be very, very careful because unfortunately in the city there's a lot of robberies. So, you know, just be mindful of where you are if you're shooting in the city. If you're shooting on the coast, it's not a problem. You could shoot the Golden Gate Bridge on the coast. You could shoot all the seascapes and things like that. But as soon as you step foot into the city, yeah, be vigilant. Make sure you have people with you. I'm in SF2. Hope we can randomly bump into each other. Yeah, I'm around if you see somebody with like a goofy backpack and who's carrying too much gear and is maybe vlogging themselves. It may be me, probably. Hit me up whenever you get back to Scotland. Hit up Isle of Skye. That would be a lot of fun. I would absolutely love to go to the Isle of Skye. I had a blast there, and funny enough, I got almost all clear weather, which is so random, you know, to get clear weather there for an entire trip. But it was pretty random. I'd love to go back and capture more of the classic moody Scotland weather that I was hoping for the last trip. Thinking I need to do road trip down to, oh, interesting. I've never heard of that place, National Park, for some photography. Shenandoah. I've never heard of that place before. Huh. Hey, Kelly. Oh, I'm doing good. Hope you're doing well. Thanks for checking in. Do I ever have workshops in SF? I did a long time ago. I did a few. Not much, to be honest. It's something I would take a look at doing in 2022. Maybe some local workshops here, like a seascape workshop or something up north towards the Golden Gate Bridge. I think would be a lot of fun. Watching from Nova Scotia. Oh, that would be a fun place to go shoot. The coastline up there is really pretty. It'd be fun to come up there. Yeah, Australia. There's so many cool places to go. It's something to look forward to, I think. You know, we've all been cooped up. We've all been hanging out. I think eventually when we're finally all traveling, it'll feel really good. But to be honest, I think at this point I'm not really in a rush to travel anywhere, which sounds weird. I've just gotten comfortable here. I'm trying to make the most out of shooting locally, really. Even if it's just like the parks right outside my house, you know? I'm trying to make the most out of San Francisco. Oh, let's see. Portugal. That sounds fun. Portugal, San Francisco. Snow melts off the Cascades. Do medium format. That sounds fun. Medium format up in the Cascades. I've never really explored the Cascades, like up in, up in Washington. I've been to Rainier, but like, not backpacking up in the Cascades. Luminosity masks. Is it a true game changer and worth the education? Don't see everyone using the technique. Is it a game changer? Probably not a game changer. I think it was a game changer when cameras weren't able to capture as much shadow and highlight detail. I don't really see it as a game changer anymore. Like most images, I could process without luminosity masks and be just fine. But it's certainly a helpful technique to learn. If you're pretty advanced and you're pretty comfortable in Lightroom, you're pretty comfortable in Photoshop, it's definitely something new to learn. If you're getting started shooting landscape photography and getting started processing, I would not focus on luminosity masks. I would wait on that. Who's my favorite photographer? I don't really have a favorite photographer. I really enjoy. I have tons of photographers that I enjoy. Like a lot of my friends, TJ Thorne, Alex Noriega. There's a lot of people on Instagram I've been following who do more minimalist work. That's been super enjoyable. Yeah, I mean, there's so many talented photographers out there. It'd be hard to pinpoint one. And I follow a lot of people outside of landscape photography too, like portrait, digital art, architecture, things like that, macro. What is the best camera for novice wanting to get into landscape photography? I don't know. I think like most new cameras that are coming out just do a great job. Like you don't need the top of the line camera to shoot great pictures. I mean, frankly, I could probably pull out like an old camera that I had a while ago, like a Canon. I could, if I had to go back to shooting with like a Canon 5D Mark II, or even like a Rebel XT that I used to use, you could still get great photos out of it. I use my iPhone for photography sometimes. It's not even a new iPhone, but I'd recommend, just take a look at some different options. Sony has some good options. Fuji has some good options for like relatively inexpensive cameras that do a really fantastic job. Like people keep recommending the Fuji X-T4 and things like that, and they look like really fun cameras for photography. So, and I was actually looking at one as well. And then I was also looking at like a Sony A7 III, A7C, some of those cameras. They're a little more affordable than like the top of the line cameras, but they still do a great job. Where did you reach about shooting? Where did I reach about shooting locations in the Dolomites? Like research? I just researched online, Google Earth mostly. Google Earth is like a very powerful tool for finding places to shoot landscape photography. I think it'd be worth making a whole video about. But yeah, that's Google Earth is great. Do I have a preference between mirrorless or non? No. I think the reason I would go with mirrorless is the weight. I love my Nikon D850. It's a fantastic camera, but it's massive. And I have to carry two because I have to do the vlogs, and then I have all my lenses. So I'm really looking at switching out my D850 to something that is much lighter weight, because carrying all this gear like 10 miles is not very fun. So, I'm trying to shave more weight off of my gear and get smaller systems. But quality-wise, they're pretty much the same. Let's see. Yeah, thanks so much, everyone, for joining. I really appreciate it. If you have any more questions, I'll answer a few more, and then I'm going to wrap up the chat. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up, or you enjoyed the processing. Yeah, and we'll do more of these if they're enjoyable. Is there a serious side to Gavin Hardcastle? He works really hard. Like, the fact that he's able to put out the videos he does that are like 20 to 30 minutes long every week, and they're all entertaining and they're all well put together. He's super serious and passionate about what he does. I think that, like, it takes a lot to make these YouTube videos. Like, I get so frustrated trying to make mine. Yeah, I mean, he puts in a lot of effort and a lot of work, and yeah, you have to be serious to do what he does, and it's enjoyable and fun because he's always joking around. But yeah, you know, we have serious conversations about like what we're doing, planning things out, you know. I wouldn't say he's like a serious guy though, but he has a serious side. 3 idiots gave this a thumbs down. You know what? Everyone's going to give every video a thumbs down. You could be like the most non-offensive person saying the most non-offensive thing. It could be like a video of a puppy who's like running around, and somebody will give it a down vote. So I don't take offense by it. No big deal. Yeah, definitely more live streams in the future. If y'all enjoyed this, hope you did, and hope it worked well. I think we'll find some new topics to cover next time. I'd like to do a live stream on time lapse if you're interested, and a live stream on night sky processing would be super helpful, I think. I also need to maybe drink more coffee so I don't ramble on so much. But other than that, I think it was a good first live stream, right? Hopefully it was pretty good. Yeah. Oh, am I planning on making a photo book? Hopefully in the future. Hopefully in the near future. Yeah. All right, everyone. Again, hope you enjoyed it. If you have any more questions that I didn't answer here in this chat, just leave the comments in the comments section. Leave the question in the comments section. I'll try and get to it just via typing it out. Yeah, at this point I'm like losing my voice, so I'm gonna pop off of here, go enjoy a little bit of sunlight while we still have it. It was like foggy all day, and then the sun just kind of peeked out, so looking like a beach day. Ooh, somebody got an Alpha A1. Nice. Props. Let me know how that camera works out. That thing is like overpowered. It's like an overpowered camera. It's like 8K video. What does it shoot? Like 500 megapixel stills or something? All right. Well, take care, everyone. Hope you have a good weekend. Hope you shoot something cool or express your creativity in some way. Or if not, just drink some beer and hang out. All right. Bye.